The automotive world just got rocked. Volkswagen has officially chosen Canada over the United States for its massive new EV battery plant, and the political shockwaves are impossible to ignore. This is not just a business decision, it's a statement, a message, and a major economic win for Canada that Washington did not see coming, especially not former President Donald Trump. Volkswagen could have picked any state, Michigan, Georgia, South Carolina, all of them hungry, offering tax breaks, promising jobs, rolling out red carpets thicker than parade floats. But Volkswagen looked south, looked north, and then said, "Sorry, America, we're going with Canada." And why Canada? Because Ottawa delivered a financial incentive package so massive it nearly matched the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act dollar for dollar. Canada treated the deal like a once-in-a-generation economic prize, and won. And here's where it stings for Trump's America. For years, Trump promised that companies would rush back into the United States because he was tough on trade, tough on China, tough on anyone who dared build factories anywhere else. But Volkswagen just made the opposite move, taking billions in investment and thousands of high-paying clean energy jobs and planting them firmly on Canadian soil. That's not just a business headline, that's a geopolitical slap. But let's break it down, because this move isn't about maple syrup and Mounties. This is about influence, global strategy, and who gets to lead the EV revolution. Canada came armed with renewable energy, massive federal subsidies, and a promise of long-term stability. Meanwhile, U.S. politics turned volatile. Companies hate uncertainty, and lately the U.S. has felt like one giant political tennis match, with policies bouncing back and forth depending on who holds office. Volkswagen clearly didn't want to gamble its electric future on that. And while American governors are scrambling to explain the loss, Canada is celebrating the kind of economic victory that reshapes entire regions. We're talking thousands of jobs, billions in economic activity, and a national branding moment that basically tells the world, if you're building the future, build it here. But the real question is, what does this mean for the United States moving forward? If one of the world's biggest automakers chooses Canada today, who chooses Canada next? And if Trump regains power, will this become a political talking point or a political crisis? And that leads us to the next major twist in this unfolding story. Because while Volkswagen is celebrating with Ottawa, there's another European giant quietly. And this one is watching the situation like a hawk. Mercedes-Benz, another titan in the EV race, is evaluating its next big battery investment, and insiders say they've taken serious interest in how Canada pulled this off. And why wouldn't they? Canada just demonstrated it can match U.S. incentives, guarantee political calm, and deliver a workforce ready to build the future without the constant threat of policy whiplash. Meanwhile, in the U.S., lawmakers are scrambling to understand how they got outmaneuvered. Governors who spent months courting Volkswagen are now pointing fingers at Washington. Washington is pointing fingers right back at them. And Trump? He's already using the situation as ammunition, saying the U.S. is losing because of terrible leadership, even though this is happening under the long-term ripple effects of policies that began during his own administration. It's political theater, but this time the audience is global investors, and they're paying attention. But here's where things get even more dramatic. Canada's deal didn't just lure Volkswagen, it cracked open a door that the U.S. tried very hard to keep shut. For years, Washington wanted to position itself as the unavoidable hub for North American EV supply chains. EV batteries, critical minerals, assembly plants, everything. But with this single strategic play, Canada basically walked onto the field, grabbed the ball, and said, "We're part of this game whether you like it or not." And the timing couldn't be worse for the U.S. China is accelerating its battery dominance. Europe is building its own supply chain defenses. The global EV race is a sprint and a marathon combined. And the U.S. just lost a step. Companies are asking tough questions. If Canada can match American subsidies, offer cleaner energy, and guarantee stability, why wouldn't you build there? And the quiet panic behind the scenes is real. Officials are now reviewing the fine print of the Inflation Reduction Act, wondering if they underestimated how far Canada was willing to go. They didn't expect Canada to fight this hard. They didn't expect Canada to spend this much, and they definitely did not expect Canada to deliver a message this loud to the world's automakers. But the consequences don't end with EVs. This decision has started whisper discussions across tech companies, energy firms, and manufacturing giants. If Volkswagen can be tempted north, maybe others can too. And if more follow, Trump's America First economic narrative could face its biggest challenge yet, not from China, not from Europe, but from the country directly above. A country that just proved it can beat the US at its own game. And as all of this unfolds, something even more surprising is brewing in the background. Because while Washington tries to regain its balance, Canada is preparing its next challenge. One that's been quietly building in the background and is now impossible to ignore. States that lost out on the Volkswagen deal are forming their own alliances, pushing Congress to unleash an even more aggressive incentive war. Governors from both parties, some who rarely agree on anything, are suddenly united in one belief. If they don't escalate fast, Canada could siphon away an entire generation of green energy investment. And that fear is real. Because while the US is still arguing about long-term industrial policy, Canada is already executing one. They've studied the weaknesses in America's system: political gridlock, policy reversals, slow permitting, and they're turning each weakness into an opportunity. It's like watching a chess player exploit every gap the opponent keeps overlooking. Here's the part no one in Washington wants to admit. Canada has an advantage that can't be copied overnight. Its natural resource base, nickel, cobalt, lithium, graphite, is becoming the new oil of the 21st century. And while the US fights environmental battles every time it tries to open a new mine, Canada has been quietly modernizing its extraction policies, offering cleaner, faster, and more predictable pathways for production. If you're an automaker looking to secure your entire EV pipeline from dirt to driveway, you go where the minerals live. And right now, they live in Canada. This is the nightmare scenario for Trump's America, a neighbor that not only steals the investment, but controls the supply chain that powers it. It undercuts the political message that America is the only true engine of North American manufacturing. If Canada keeps stacking wins, Trump's argument that factories will return because they love America starts to crumble. Because at the end of the day, companies don't love countries. They love stability. But here's where things take an even sharper turn. Behind the scenes, automakers in Japan and South Korea, Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, LG Energy, are quietly re-evaluating their North American plans. These companies watch trends like hawks. They see a country securing minerals, offering massive incentives, and winning the biggest EV deal of the year. And they see another country, once dominant, drowning in political noise and regulatory unpredictability. The whispers are getting louder. If Volkswagen chose Canada, maybe we should look there too. And while these conversations unfold in boardrooms across the Pacific, Canada is preparing a strategic announcement that could change the entire momentum of the EV race once again. A leaked briefing suggests the Canadian government is preparing to roll out a new national strategy, one designed not just to attract automakers, but to lock in the entire clean tech ecosystem. Think battery recycling hubs, advanced manufacturing centers, mineral refining clusters, and an expanded network of EV research labs. It's not a one-off win. They're laying the groundwork for a full-scale industrial transformation. And that's where the geopolitical stakes explode. Because if Canada becomes the place where companies can mine the minerals, refine the materials, build the batteries, assemble the vehicles, and recycle the components at the end of their life cycle, all within one nation, that's an economic fortress the US can't ignore. It means Canada stops being the friendly neighbor in the EV race and becomes the actual powerhouse of the North American supply chain. Suddenly, US senators are raising alarms. Committees are calling emergency hearings. Analysts are warning that if America loses too many major projects, the domestic EV workforce could weaken and entire regions that were promised revitalization may slip back into decline. This isn't just about bragging rights anymore. This is about who controls the jobs of the future. And Trump sees all of it. He understands the symbolism. Volkswagen choosing Canada over the US isn't just bad optics. It's a direct hit to the core message of his economic identity. It undercuts the promise that tough talk and America First policies alone could force companies to stay loyal. Volkswagen didn't budge. They made the cold calculation that Canada was the smarter long-term bet. And that's why Trump's allies are now urging him to make the Volkswagen loss a central talking point. to claim the US is falling behind, to paint Canada as a threat, to argue that only he can bring the companies back. The rhetoric is heating up, the tone is shifting, and the political temperature is rising fast. But while the US gears up for economic confrontation, Canada is on the verge of unveiling something even more disruptive, something that could tilt the balance so sharply that even Washington insiders are beginning to panic, because buried in that same leaked briefing is a hint that Canada may soon announce a landmark partnership with one of the world's leading battery giants, rumored to be either CATL or Panasonic. And if that happens, it won't just reinforce Canada's success with Volkswagen. It will cement Canada as the new gravitational center of North America's EV industry. This is the kind of move that doesn't just attract investment, it shifts global strategy. Imagine it, a major battery powerhouse committing billions to build a state-of-the-art gigafactory on Canadian soil. Access to minerals, local, renewable energy, abundant, political stability, strong, government support, practically guaranteed. For a battery manufacturer, it's like getting to build the future with every advantage already baked in. And for Washington, it's a nightmare scenario that signals Canada isn't just competing, it's winning. And here's where the shockwave gets even larger. Once a second major player commits to Canada, the momentum becomes self-sustaining. Supply chain partners follow, metal refiners follow, component makers follow, tech startups follow, innovation hubs form around these factories like magnets. Suddenly, Canada isn't landing one big deal. It's creating a manufacturing supercluster strong enough to challenge the US head-on. That's why analysts in New York and DC are quietly warning investors. The US is at risk of losing the EV crown it assumed it would wear by default. Not to China, not to Europe, but to Canada, the neighbor it underestimated for decades. And every step Canada takes is a step that stings Trump's America even harder, because the political narrative he built is colliding with economic reality. If Canada keeps stacking these wins, Trump can't simply blame foreign nations or bad trade deals. He'll have to explain how America let Canada walk away with the biggest prizes of the clean energy era, prizes he promised would belong to the United States. It's a political wound, and the Volkswagen decision was only the first cut. But what comes next could deepen that wound even further, because as Canada finalizes these potential partnerships, insiders say Ottawa is preparing an even more ambitious move, one that could redefine its entire economic identity. The leaked documents hint at a federally backed North American battery belt, stretching from Ontario through Quebec and deep into the Atlantic provinces. Not just one factory, not just one investment, a coordinated government-supported corridor designed to dominate every step of the EV supply chain: mining, refining, manufacturing, recycling, research, and export. If this initiative becomes real, it would be the first time Canada positions itself not as a complementary partner to the US, but as a direct competitor in the fight for the industries of tomorrow. And that shift is already sending shockwaves through Washington. Because a unified Canadian battery belt means foreign automakers looking to enter North America suddenly have a choice, an actual alternative to the American industrial system. And here's the part that's lighting up phones in DC offices. Major US automakers are watching this too. Ford, GM, Stellantis. They've invested billions into the American heartland, but they're not blind. They see the incentives Canada is offering. They see the minerals Canada controls. They see the deals Ottawa is signing. If Canada becomes the more competitive environment, these companies could start pushing Washington, not politely, but aggressively, to match or exceed Canada's support. That's the political danger for Trump, because if Canada keeps winning, American companies might start demanding policies that contradict his traditional message. They'll want bigger subsidies, more government involvement, faster green energy approvals, and Trump's America First anti-subsidy stance starts rubbing directly against what US corporations say they need to survive. It's a collision course waiting to happen. But let's zoom out for a moment, because while the US argues, Canada is capitalizing on something much bigger: global perception. International investors love consistency. They crave predictability. And Canada is packaging itself as the stable, forward-thinking, low-drama destination for long-term industrial investment. That's an identity countries fight decades to build, and Canada is capturing it in real time. And as that identity solidifies, foreign investors from Europe, from Asia, even from the Middle East, are beginning to signal an interest in building not just factories, but entire innovation hubs in Canada. Tech labs, battery R&D centers, clean energy startups, private equity funds are circling, smelling opportunity, planning moves. And that leads to the next chapter of this geopolitical shift. Because as more global players start eyeing Canada as the new frontier for EV dominance, the US is about to face a reckoning that goes far deeper than one lost factory deal. If Canada becomes the preferred landing zone for clean tech investment, the United States risks losing its grip on the next generation of manufacturing innovation. And this is where the warning sirens start flashing in American boardrooms. Innovation doesn't just follow money, it settles where the ecosystem thrives. If the heart of that ecosystem shifts north, the talent follows, the startups follow, the breakthroughs follow, and eventually, the economic center of gravity shifts with them. Think about Silicon Valley. It didn't become a global tech powerhouse because of one company. It became one because dozens of institutions, investors, labs, and innovators clustered together and fed each other's momentum. Now imagine Canada creating that same kind of gravitational pull for EVs, batteries, and clean energy technologies. That's the scenario keeping US officials up at night. And as more signs emerge, panic is setting in quietly but clearly. States that once assumed companies would always choose the US are now whispering about their vulnerabilities. Manufacturing leaders are warning that Canada's clean power advantage, hydro, wind, nuclear, gives it a long-term cost edge the US simply can't match in many regions. And if electricity is the oil of the EV age, Canada has the cheaper, cleaner supply. This is the reality Trump never expected to confront. His argument rested on the idea that America could strong-arm its way to industrial dominance, that companies would return to the US because of patriotism, pressure, or policy threats. But Volkswagen didn't respond to pressure. They responded to opportunity. They responded to stability. They responded to a government offering long-term clarity that the US, under constant political turbulence, just couldn't match. And now, Trump's advisors are urging him to frame Canada's rise as a direct challenge to American sovereignty, to paint it as a threat to American workers. To claim it proves the US is losing on the world stage again. Expect speeches, expect rallies, expect fiery rhetoric targeting the very neighbor America usually counts on. But while the US prepares its political counterattack, Canada is already looking ahead to the next frontier, the piece of the EV puzzle no one wants to talk about publicly, but everyone knows is coming. Because hidden within those same leaked planning documents is a hint that Canada may soon announce an aggressive push into solid-state battery development, a field so disruptive that whichever country masters it first could leapfrog every competitor overnight. These batteries charge faster, last longer, run cooler, and pack more power into less space. They're the holy grail of the EV world, and every major automaker is racing toward them. If Canada positions itself as the global hub for solid-state research and prototyping, the Volkswagen deal becomes just the opening act of a much larger transformation. And here's the part fueling whispers in tech circles. Several leading battery scientists, some from the US, some from Europe, have already been approached by Canadian institutions offering major research grants, lab funding, and leadership roles. That's not normal recruitment. That's a talent offensive. And if even a fraction of those experts move their work to Canada, the country could accelerate its position in the battery arms race faster than anyone anticipated. Meanwhile, the US is stuck watching this unfold while trying to reconcile its own fractured political priorities. One side wants massive clean energy expansion. The other side wants to roll back green policies entirely. Companies don't know which direction the country will swing next, and that uncertainty is exactly what pushes investment toward calmer waters. And right now, those waters look a lot like Canada. Trump is already sharpening his counter-message, warning that America is being replaced in the industries of the future. But here's the irony. The more he frames Canada's rise as a threat, the more he accidentally elevates Canada's importance. Investors love hearing that a nation is powerful enough to worry American politicians. It makes that nation look strong, stable, and safe for long-term bets. And the longer this narrative builds, the clearer it becomes that the Volkswagen decision was not an isolated moment. It was the tipping point. The moment when global companies realized Canada was no longer a backup plan, but a primary destination. The moment when America's default dominance started to crack. But all of this momentum is leading to something even bigger. Because as Canada positions itself at the center of the next industrial revolution, the US is about to discover a consequence it's been trying desperately to avoid. A consequence that could reshape trade, labor markets, and political alliances across the entire continent. And that consequence is coming into focus right now, as sources close to the negotiations reveal that Ottawa is preparing to announce a multi-billion-dollar, multi-partner initiative aimed at creating a fully integrated EV ecosystem in Canada. This plan will not just involve automakers like Volkswagen. It will include battery producers, critical mineral suppliers, research institutions, and even logistics and recycling networks. Essentially, Canada is setting the stage to control the full life cycle of electric vehicles, from raw materials to the finished car, and even what happens when the battery reaches the end of its life. For the US, the implications are massive. Losing out on this level of strategic investment is not just a temporary setback. It could slow the country's EV ambitions, shift high-paying jobs north, and create a competitive disadvantage in a global industry that is accelerating faster than anyone expected. Politically, it undermines the America First narrative that Trump and his allies have long championed, showing that companies are making decisions based on stability, incentives, and long-term planning, not patriotic loyalty. At the same time, this is a victory for Canada on the global stage. It's a signal to the world that the country can compete with the US and Europe in high-tech manufacturing, that it can attract billions in foreign investment, and that it can play a leading role in the clean energy revolution. By acting decisively, offering incentives, and ensuring political stability, Canada has turned a single deal into a symbol of strategic foresight and long-term planning. Volkswagen's choice may have seemed like just another corporate decision, but it's much more than that. It's a turning point, a warning for the US, a triumph for Canada, and a defining moment in the race for the future of transportation. The real question now is, how will America respond, and can it reclaim its edge in a continent that is quietly tilting toward its northern neighbor? The automotive world, political analysts, and investors alike will be watching closely, because this story is far from over, and its consequences will echo for decades.